what are my top 3 specialty squat variations to improve the front squat. So my 3 favorite, and not necessarily in this order, but I do like the barbell hack squat for this. The barbell hack squat, because of, you're holding the barbell behind you, it's really good at teaching you to brace the abdominal properly and to keep upright position, especially coming off of the bottom, which I think it translates very well to what's happening coming off of the bottom in the front squat. So I love the barbell hack squat for that purpose. Another one that I really like is the quad squat. And the quad squat, the advantage of this is your heels are elevated on a wedge 30 degrees. So a 30-degree elevation is so steep that it truly allows you to squat in a much more upright position, and it also allows you to train the entirety of the knee joint. Okay, so the front squat, because the barbell is in front, because you're more upright, because the knees travel forward furthermore, the more you're able to train the ability of the knee joint to work through a full range of motion, the easier it's going to be for you to translate that to the front squat eventually. Then finally, my number one favorite would be a cyclist squat performed with a safety bar. Now the safety bar, because of the setup of the barbell, the weight is shifted forward. The cyclist squat, you're also elevated 30 degrees, which really allows you to be more upright and really work that knee joint. But also the feet are only 4 to 6 inches apart, so 10 to 15 centimeters, which resembles the width of the pedals of a bicycle. But that closer stance really works well, the VMO and all the muscles around that knee joint. And to me, if you're able to really train these muscles, push the knee joint, force more ankle dorsiflexion, stay more upright, and you're using an implement that pushes the load a little bit more forward, then you're going to be able to translate that eventually to an increase in front squat performance. Any indicator lifts for ice hockey goalies? So this is an important question for me because I get these questions asked a lot in my sports course. But for those of you guys who've attended my sports specific training camp, you know that I am not a fan at all of indicator lifts for team sports. To me, that concept never made any sense whatsoever. If you're training a shot putter or a sprint, a track athlete, where the sport is very simplistic in its nature, right? Like shot put, for example, it's one movement. Like the sport is one movement. So now it's much simpler to find an exercise that will carry over better to the performance of that one movement. But if you're training a goalie where they're moving all over the place at different velocities, different planes of motion, different angles, different limbs, now how can I legitimately tell you that a specific strength training movement will mean that, if you incline press X amount, you will be the best goalie in the league? It makes zero sense at all to me. So that's why, like, even with athletes, and again, I'm talking about team sports athletes where the demands are so mixed, I do not use indicator lift in terms of gauging a performance status. I use limiting lift. So whatever lift that athlete has that's limiting his athleticism, this is what will become my indicator lift. But not in the sense that, you're improving this, you're a better goalie. In the sense that if I'm improving this, you'll be a more structurally sound, well-balanced athlete, which means that you have more potential to perform at a higher level. So should you use the same rep scheme or loading pattern on flexor and extensor movement? Yes, you can definitely. There's a few exceptions. Even more, like, has more to do with the chin up. So for example, if you're doing a ascending rep scheme, so let's say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, well, most people on chin ups are gonna have a hell of a hard time doing like a heavy 4 and then like dropping the intensity back down and be able to do 8 at the end of the workout. It's not a very feasible rep scheme for most people. So if I were to do an ascending rep scheme as the main driver of my meso, and then I have chin up, what I would do simply on chin up is just use a standard set with the intensity of the rep scheme chosen. So if it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's an 83% average rep scheme intensity. So all I would do is 5 by 6 on the chin, okay, simply because it's just more feasible. But otherwise, go for it. Like, you can match both flexor, extensor with the same loading pattern. So do hypertrophy techniques like rest, pause, and drop sets have its place in training if the goal is strength? Yes, for sure. So you could do a strength block, so a 12-week strength macro, where the accumulation phases, the B's and the C's, you could use stuff like drop sets, rest, pause, 1 1/4 reps, pause training. So all little hypertrophy type techniques, but now they're used in the accumulation phases where the goal is to drive volume. And then you use them in the assistance and remedial exercise, so you can still train your primary like undisturbed and keep improving and rehearsing these lifts. But you're using these little special techniques at a point in the training where you're facilitating volume adaptation. So to push that spectrum of the metabolic end of training is not a problem for strength, because we all know that your potential to develop strength is also dependent on your mass. So at one point, if you can't progress strength-wise, well, it might be because you're lacking hypertrophy. So to me, it's a non-issue to do that in a strength phase. So what would the overhead press B series angle be for a macro cycle focusing on improving the overhead? It would change from phase to phase, but you have to understand that within a training session, I like to use the 90-degree principle, which is if I'm doing an overhead press in my A series, so overhead press, now the B series, I want to be at 90-degree arm angle from that overhead press, so I'll do a flat angle. Okay, so every time a session has overhead press as your A series, the B series will be a flat angle. Now, I also do the 90-degree principle within the microcycle, which means that whatever I do on upper body 1, so overhead press, let's say, on upper body 2, I'll do 90-degree from that angle, which would be a bench press, so a flat bench press. But the problem, though, is because a overhead macro cycle, we're doing an overhead press variation in our A series for 12 weeks straight, so every meso has an overhead variation. Now you cannot afford to do the 90-degree principle within the microcycle every phase, because if you do that, it means that for 12 weeks, you are not training the incline or the dip angle at any point. So if you don't train them, you're going to detrain them too much. So the overhead is the special case. It's this one case where you have to break the 90-degree principle rule within the microcycle in accumulation 1 and accumulation 2. So what I do is accumulation 1, my upper body 1 A series will be an overhead press variation. My upper body 2 A series would be a dip. Okay, so now the dip, why do I put it in accumulation 1? Because it's the angle that's the further away from the overhead, which is what I'm trying to peak by week 12. So now both of my intensifications, I'm doing overhead and bench press. So I'm following the 90-degree principle for the intensification phases, because the intensification phase, it's where I'm really going to get the most bang for my buck for my overhead press training, because I'm focusing on the intensity end of the spectrum. Now accumulation 2, I break the 90-degree principle within the microcycle again, but now I'm not training the dip angle, I'm training the incline, which is the other angle we hadn't trained. But I'm training the incline accumulation 2, because now that angle resembles more the overhead, which is what I'm trying to peak. Why am I talking about those A series? Because the A series of each session will dictate the angle that you're using in the B series, which was the question. So if I'm doing dip on upper body 2 and accumulation 1, so it means that my B exercise for that workout will be an incline. And then on accumulation 2, if I'm doing incline as my A exercise on my upper body 2, it means that my B on that session will be a decline angle. So the angle of the B series is always 90 degree from whatever you did in the A series. So does the push press or push jerk as its place as a primary exercise? So that's a good question, but the one point I want to come across here is, so to me, the Olympic lifting variations act as a assistance exercise to my training program, because to me, these, and here I'm talking more about the training I do with professional athletes, the Olympic lift variation, the purpose of them to me is to improve explosive strength. So I use them as a tool to improve explosive strength. So they're not they wouldn't be used as primary exercise in the sense that they wouldn't be a consistent part of the long-term programming, because I wouldn't use them all the time. I only use them for specific goals, for specific purposes. So for example, if I'm building the general preparation phase of an athlete, I will not use these exercises. But as I'm moving on to the specific preparation phase, and I need more dynamic, more explosiveness in my training session to work on that entity of speed strength, then I'll use them and introduce them into the workout. And they might be first. Well, they're most likely going to be first in the workout in the A series. So in that sense, they become a primary exercise. But I just want you guys to understand that to me, they were more a tool that was needed at that point in time in training that I put there because of the nature of the lift. But they're not necessarily a primary exercise in which I'm going to build and structure the core of my programming. Okay, so I hope this answers the question.